All right, hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, Creating Online Assessments in MyCourses. My name is Barbara Stetchison, and I'm here today with my colleague, Teddy Quintoro. We're both learning technology consultants with Teaching and Learning Services. Also joining us today is Adam Finkelstein, who is the Associate Director of Learning Environments at TLS, and he will be moderating the chat during our session. There are a few items I'd like to bring to your attention before we begin. This session is being recorded, so if you prefer to not be visible, you can turn off your video so that you don't appear in the recording. Also, the recording, as well as the slides for today's presentation and any additional resources will be posted on the TLS website. And also, please note that you've been muted upon entry, and we ask that you remain muted for the duration of the webinar. Teddy and I will be answering your questions at the end of the session. We've set aside about 10 minutes for this. However, feel free to use the chat if you'd like to type in any questions along the way, and Adam will be more than happy to answer your questions there. So we have 3 session outcomes for you today. By the end of the session, our goal is that you'll be able to identify the capabilities of the quizzes and assignment tools in MyCourses. These are the 2 main assessment tools in MyCourses. You'll be able to distinguish which tool is most suitable for different types of assessments, as well as describe how assessments can be set up in MyCourses to support academic integrity. So as I mentioned, the quizzes tool is one of the main assessment tools in MyCourses. In a nutshell, it's designed to make online testing possible. So imagine taking the exams, the tests, or quizzes that you would normally administer in person and converting them to an online format. In the slides that follow, we're going to look at what the quizzes tool has to offer, some of its most noteworthy capabilities, and what kind of assessment activities it best supports. So although its name may make you think otherwise, the quizzes tool is not just for quizzes or multiple choice exams. Although the quizzes tool does allow you to administer these types of assessments in an online format, you can also use the quizzes tool for other kinds of assessment activities. So some of the other types of assessment activities that we recommend is that you can use quizzes to create practice activities, to encourage your students to do pre-class readings so that they come to class prepared to engage in your session. You can also create practice activities in the form of a study tool, so providing students with multiple attempts to answer different sets of questions. And once students have completed these practice activities, you can also share the correct question responses with them so that students can use these for further practice and study purposes. Another way to use the quizzes tool is to evaluate students' learning progress through low-stakes knowledge checks. So this is an ideal way to promote review and check students' understanding of material, as well as give them an opportunity to gauge how well they're grasping different concepts by providing them with feedback on their understanding. And finally, an open book exam with a set time limit for completion is another great use for the quizzes tool. You can, for example, create an exam with a 3-hour limit, which emphasizes more synthesis type questions that require students apply their skills and knowledge. So for instance, you can structure your exam questions around problem-based scenarios and require students to apply their knowledge to the given scenarios. For this, you'll want to inform students prior to the exam of which materials they can refer to, such as their notes, textbook, etc. And you can also include an honor code statement at the beginning of the exam to help reinforce academic integrity. So why use the quizzes tool? Well, one of the key components that sets the quizzes tool apart from the assignments tool is that you can create timed assessments, such as an open book exam, as I just described. So you may want to enforce a 3-hour time limit, for example, to complete the open book exam, but allow a 48-hour window in which students can access it, so that there's a bit more flexibility due to time zone restrictions, for instance. Students could then start the exam at a time that is convenient for them, and then once they've started it, they would have 3 hours to complete it. Another reason to use the quizzes tool is that your questions can include more than just text. You can embed videos, audio files, images, and links. And this can be useful for, say, a music class where students have to listen to a piece of music before answering a question or a series of questions. Quizzes can also be set up so that students have one or multiple attempts to answer the questions. You can choose a set number of attempts or unlimited attempts. And you can also choose which attempt is entered into your gradebook. So whether it's the highest, the lowest, or even an average of all attempts. Questions can also be randomized in different ways to ensure that each student receives a unique set of questions. And then a really nice time saver is that you can link scores directly to your gradebook so that you don't have to grade the same work twice. And finally, once your students have completed the quiz, it can be useful to view statistics about their performance. So you can view quiz statistics such as grade distribution, the grade average, specific question statistics, etc. As you begin creating your quiz questions, you'll notice there are several question types that you can choose from to assess your students. In fact, there's 11 question types in total, and these can be divided into 2 different categories. So you have questions where students select a response, such as the multiple choice question that you see here on your left. And there are question types where students can generate a response, such as the long answer question type that you see here on your right. Also note that long answer questions are referred to as written response questions in MyCourses. Other select a response question types include true or false, multi-select, matching, and ordering. And then generated question types also include short answer, multi-short answer, fill in the blank, arithmetic, significant figures, and as I mentioned, written response. So all of these questions can be graded automatically, except for the written response, which must be graded manually. You have 2 ways to create quiz questions. You can either add new questions to your quiz directly, or you can add them to the question library and then import them into your quiz. As a best practice, we recommend that you create all your questions using the question library, simply because it offers much more flexibility. The question library is a central repository that stores and archives your questions, and then you can reuse them within a course for different types of assessments. You can also create multiple sections or folders within your question library and organize your questions by type or by topic, just making it a lot easier for you to find your questions. Consolidating questions within the question library enables you to efficiently transfer your questions to a new course, so from one semester to another. And you can also import questions from an existing collection that you may have created previously offline or from a test bank, so directly into your question library from a CSV file. And note that instructions on how to do this, as well as how to create your questions within the question library, and any of the steps that we're referring to during this presentation will all be posted as resources on the TLS website. There are multiple ways that you can add restrictions to a quiz. The first is that you can set an availability. So you can set a start and end date, which can be used to make a quiz available to students for a specific period of time. So in the example you see here, there's a 48-hour window open for students to access the quiz. Students must begin their quiz before this end time. But note that as long as students enter the quiz before the end time, they can fully complete and submit the quiz. However, if they are booted from the quiz for any reason, such as a loss of power or their browser freezes, they will not be able to re-enter if the time period has expired. Also note that the time a student submits a quiz is both date and time stamped. As I already mentioned, you can enforce a time limit for your quiz, as well as identify a grace period. So in this example, there is a 90-minute time limit with a 15-minute grace period. A grace period can be helpful for students who have a slow internet connection, for instance. And then after the grace period has passed, all submission attempts will be marked as late. You can also identify what the consequences are for submitting past the time limit. So this could be that the student can continue working on it, or that the student can no longer make changes, or the student can continue working, but the attempt will automatically be marked as 0 after the deadline has passed. It's also possible to add release conditions, which allow you to create a custom learning path through the materials in your course. So for example, you could require students to visit all content modules and topics in your course before gaining access to a final exam, for instance. And then there may be situations where you want to grant special access to the quiz. So this could be for an alternate date, an extended time limit, or increasing the number of attempts a student is allowed. So you can accommodate specific student needs by granting special access to certain individual students. So this allows them time and date restrictions that are different from the rest of the class. So for example, this is useful in instances where a student misses a quiz due to illness, or if a student requires more time to write the quiz, it's possible to make these types of accommodations with special access. So randomizing questions in a quiz ensures that each student will receive a unique set of questions. And you can do this by incorporating question pools or randomizing sections into your quiz to help reduce instances of cheating. Shuffling can be done at the quiz level so that the entire quiz appears in a random order, or it can be done at the section level so that only specific sections have randomized questions. When shuffled, every student gets the same set of questions, but the order of the questions presented will be different for each student. Quiz questions can also be shuffled to add additional variety to your quiz. However, this is specific to multiple choice questions. And you can also add a question pool. And what this does is that it adds a subset of questions from a larger question pool, resulting in a different version of the quiz for each student. So the greater the difference between the number of questions in the question pool and the number of questions on the quiz, then the greater the chance that each student will get a different set of questions. So this can be handy in instances where you wish to create multiple versions of the same exam. Previewing a quiz. So we highly recommend that you preview your quiz before making it available to your students. You can use the quiz preview option to view a quiz the way a student would see it before actually releasing it to them. So in a preview, you can answer questions, view aloud hints, submit the quiz, and even view auto-graded answers. So we highly recommend you do this so that you can test the accuracy of your content and your grading before it is released and available to your students. By default, once students submit their quiz, they are only able to see the score they received on their attempt. However, you can share additional information with them, such as which questions they answered correctly or incorrectly or both, as well as sharing the correct answers with them. You can also control when students are given access to this feedback. So this could be, say, following grades being released or after all students have completed the exam. If you're worried about exam questions being shared among students, then we recommend limiting the amount of time for which this information is made available to them, and only opting to show questions answered incorrectly. This way, you're able to control access to the exam questions after the exam period has passed, yet students have access to the relevant information that they need for their review. And so this sums up our portion of the quizzes tool and what its capabilities include. Next, Teddy will review the assignments tool and what assessment types it can best support.
Okay, thanks, Barbara. So the assignments tool is the other assessment tool that is core to MyCourses. And it's really a great way to collect student artifacts and track submissions. So from a student's perspective, when you submit an assignment, they get a confirmation email like this that was received, and they can always go back to the assignment tool to show the history of all the submissions for each assignment. From your perspective, it allows you to collect and have a bird's eye view of all submissions. So you can see those who have submitted, those who haven't, and those who have submitted late. Of course, it also avoids having to respond to emails confirming whether an assignment has been received or not. So the assignment tool also allows for flexibility in terms of grading and providing feedback to students. It allows you to leave feedback, including text, audio, video, annotate the student's documents directly in the browser, and attach a rubric. So we'll take a look at each of these examples shortly. And when your feedback is published, students can easily access it from anywhere. And as an instructor, you can see when it has been read. Over here. So what are the key considerations that you have to think about when building an assignment? We can boil it down to 4 areas. So there's the assignment type. There are 2 types. First, it is individual, which is a single student submitting an artifact, or groups. When groups are created in MyCourses, they can be assigned to an assignment where one group member can submit the work for the team, and the grades and feedback provided by the instructor will automatically be assigned to all students within that group. In terms of submission type, there are 4 of them. The file submission is the traditional aspect where an instructor expects one or multiple files uploaded. There's also text submission. This gives the ability for students to type in and answer directly within MyCourses, and for you to grade and give feedback directly without having to download their files and upload it afterwards. On-paper submission and observed in person is effectively the same feature. It allows the instructor to grade and give feedback to an artifact that was not submitted in MyCourses. So when we talk about timing for assignments, the key field is due date. That is when students are expected to submit, but is marked late if it's passed, while end date is a timing when a student can no longer submit at all. And as Barbara mentioned, in quizzes, you can also provide special access to students beyond the regular timing if they need particular accommodation. And finally, the last consideration when you set up an assignment, you have to think about how you might evaluate the students. Will it be connected to the gradebook? Will you want to grade students without seeing their names, so blind grading? Will you want to annotate directly in the browser without downloading the file? Will you develop and show students a rubric that will be used to assess their work? So let's we'll be going through 3 examples: term paper, team presentation, and an open book exam. Our goal here is to be able to showcase the assignment features in context. If you would like more strategies for designing assessments, please take a look at the TLS website. And if you haven't attended or viewed the designing assessments for remote delivery, I would encourage you to do so. All right, so without further ado, let's take a look at the first one. So you have a paper that is worth a significant portion of the final grade. In order to break down the workload for these students, you're asking them to submit several components, here 1, 2, 3, 4, over the course of the semester. All of these 4 items are actually variations of the MyCourses assignment. So to start this project, you have students submit early in the semester a working thesis statement. Because you want to keep it simple for both you yourself and your students, you are asking them to type their statement directly in MyCourses, right here. So there's no file submission. And you can grade it directly within MyCourses and enter a completion grade here with a short text comment. Next, you are asking students to submit an annotated bibliography. This is also an item to make sure they are progressing as they should. You might decide to give a grade for completion or provide feedback if students ask. And in this case, you have enabled the annotation tools, so you can look at the document directly within the browser and add comments inside here. For the draft, you're asking students to submit a Word document because this will allow you to provide feedback via track changes. So you download all the documents here, store them in OneDrive, and use a tablet to annotate offline, perhaps in your backyard while sipping a glass of wine. And once you are back on your computer, you zip all the feedback files and upload it at once. Because all the files have the student ID, as you can see below here, and the assignment ID in the file name, they automatically get attached to the correct student. Another option that you might think about is to consider peer assessment and give students the opportunity to see each other's work and provide feedback from multiple perspectives. And so back to the original students. In this case, you can use a tool called Peer Grade that will automatically assign their peers for review. We have a series of webinars for that tool if you are interested later. For the final submission for the paper, students will be uploading their document. Depending if you have previously provided thorough feedback in the draft portion, you might decide not to download all the files, but read it directly in MyCourses. You can provide annotations and grade the paper. You will also be able to maybe complete a rubric, which will automatically provide a score based on the level attained by the student in each of these criteria. So when the rubric is graded, you can see the total score here. And with MyCourses, the rubric here attached can also be displayed to students, so they can see how they are going to be evaluated even prior to submitting their work. Okay, so jumping to another example, let's now take a look at a team presentation. Let's say you have assigned students to groups of 3, and you again create the groups in MyCourses. And for one of their final submissions, students will need to present. In order to provide flexibility to students, you did not choose a specific tool, but are allowing students to record a video using the tools of their choice, or even present live in Zoom, as long as they could meet the presentation's requirements. So you could choose to either create a file submission if students are uploading videos, or an observed in-person group assignment. You also created a rubric to make sure you were evaluating students with the same criteria, regardless of their format. In terms of giving feedback, you recorded a video to provide overall feedback, which wouldn't be easily expressed in text format. Actually, no, you recorded an audio file because you had to move to your basement as the kids were throwing a tantrum and making a mess upstairs. As an added option, you can also have students evaluate each other. Either groups evaluating each other's presentations or students evaluating each other's contribution within the team. So that there's an option there. You can use this via Microsoft Forms. And as another option, instead of doing this in MyCourses Assignments tool, students can also upload their videos to video assignments. And this is also a tool that's integrated in MyCourses. It allows students to give comments to each other in particular parts of the video, and also allows video uploads larger than 1 gigabyte. So if you're thinking about in terms of the length of this, it's about 38 minutes for 1 gigabyte for 1080p. So for the final example, you're planning on delivering an open book exam. So this is a particular example where I'd like to highlight that we are going to be using both the assignments and the quizzes tool in combination. So you need a space to collect the academic integrity cover page that students have read and signed. The students can take a picture of the form signed or digitally annotate the document and upload it in MyCourses into the assignments tool. Next, you also have a randomized questions quiz, but then you need students to write out their steps and attach a file specific to your area. So then you can use another assignments to gather these submissions. To make it easier for your students, you can also link the submission to this assignment from the quiz. And then you can also grade this portion blindly without seeing the students' names in the assignment tool. So you can see here that there's no name to the student, and also here, no student's name. A good practice over here is to make sure that students don't attach their their names to the file name, so that there's no giveaway there if you plan on doing blind grading. So the key idea here is to use many tools to match the different parts of the exam that will help students submit their work and for you to give feedback. And lastly, in terms of another option here, If you're thinking about designing a quiz that requires a lot of handwriting, and perhaps you have a large course with many students, Crowdbark might be a better suited option for this. So there's a couple key takeaways that we'd like you to come out of this webinar. And the first one is select one or more assessments tools that will be able to measure the learning outcomes achieved by the students, but also allow you to provide the feedback, whether it's automatic or whether you use a rubric. Also inform students in the course outline. So that would give an overview of what is expected from them and the tools that will be used in the course. I think something that we've mentioned throughout this webinar is provide an opportunity for students to practice the assessment methods in a low risk and a low stakes environment. It's perhaps graded, but it's maybe not part of their final grade, so that students have the opportunity to see what it would feel like to use a tool before their graded assignment or assessment. So an example of that would be to create a course outline quiz where you can ask a few key questions pertaining to information on the course. Another example would be to create a pretest, similar to what Barbara mentioned earlier, before students actively learn the material. So pretests can help students identify the areas they need to spend more time on. And yet another example would be to create reading quizzes to verify if students have completed the required readings before attending a live discussion, and maybe they're going to go in breakout rooms. For all these examples, try to use the tools you're planning to use for high stakes assessments. This could mean the material will be presented to students. So if you're planning on including images and videos in the quiz, for example, that they are able to view them, and also the types of answers students will be providing. So if they need to record videos, upload different file formats, take photos of their work, this will help students identify which areas they might need support for, whether it is with IT or if they might need a particular accommodation. And so they can do this before it comes down to their graded assessment. And finally, we've talked about this as well, is to preview or test the assessment you created, either by previewing as a student, or you can even partner with a colleague to test each other's assessments. So you can enroll a colleague in your course as a demo student and have them try the assessment and follow the instructions as if they were a student. So we've given you a lot of information today, and a good next step would be to take a look at a course called MyCourses Essentials. If you haven't seen it before, it's inside of MyCourses and you've automatically been enrolled. It's a step-by-step guide to what we talked about today. And you can also use it to take a look at particular areas that you want to take a look at. And finally, I would also like to remind you that this webinar is part of a series, including what I've talked about. If you're interested in peer assessment, we have a peer grade coming up on June 23rd, next week. And you can also register and view them on the TLS website. So many of the webinars we actually have already given, and it's already available on the website. The recordings of our current one will be posted on this page. And the link that you see here is also going to be posted on the chat at the bottom. Yep. And something to keep in mind when you do review is here you'll be able to see and stream the recordings, but also and download the slides. And also you can actually take a look at the many resources that Adam has been posting in the chat here. And in addition to anything else that we may be answering afterwards and think about, we'll be adding into the resources page there. But you have to click on the plus sign there to expand it. So this concludes the webinar portion of our session. But before we end it, we'd like to ask you two questions. What's your most important takeaway from today's session? And two, do you have any additional questions on what we covered today? So please feel free to continue typing your questions and these answers in the chat, and we'll be trying to answer them as we go through.
Just while everyone's doing that, I'm just going to address one of the questions that came up earlier from Catherine about how do you let students see the answers after they've submitted their quizzes, and also whether this can be automated. So yes, they can be automated. This can be automated, and this is done basically when you edit your quiz. There is a tab when doing this called submission views. So it's under submission views where you can control all of this. The default submission view is that students just see the score that they got on their attempt. But you'll see that you can either edit the default or you can add an additional view so that students can submit and then they can get a message saying, congratulations, you've submitted your quiz. And then a couple of days later, they can go in and access more information. Or if you want the default to be that they can see what they got right and wrong immediately, you can do this too. So there's different options that you can choose from. The slide that I showed previously showed some of those. So it's whether you want them to see what they got right, what they got wrong, both, and if you want to provide the correct question responses. So you can set that up when you create your quiz so that you don't have to think about it. It's just automated to them after they submit. I hope that answers the question.
Barbara, maybe one would be following up on the question about a map, or if there's a way that you could kind of do something where you have an image where you're selecting spots.
The quiz, there is no quiz question type that would allow you to create like an interactive type image that students could click a point on the image with their response. That unfortunately does not exist. You can include an image, however, with your question of your map. I don't know if it's possible to maybe, if you had like coordinates on the map and students, instead of having to click on it, they could just specify the coordinates. You could do something like that, but not in terms of clicking on an actual image per se. Scanning the questions here. Teddy, do you see anything you want to address?
I don't see anything directly. I mean, there's a few the Zoom question, but I think.
Could you clarify a little more with blind grading about where you can and where you can't do blind grading?
Okay, yeah, thanks. That's good. So in terms of blind grading, you can't do it in the quiz tool, but if you plan on doing so, you can definitely do it within the assignment tool. So because most of the folks that generally want to do the blind grading as well will do it not on multiple choice questions or other type questions that are automatically graded anyways, but the assignment tool is where you would do that. So if you plan on creating questions that require blind grading in the quiz, you can still put the questions in the quiz tool, meaning that you can still have it shuffled and ask the question and randomized. But then when the students submit their answer, they would submit it directly in the assignments tool. And so that's where they would put in their question and their answer, and you would go and grade them directly in the assignment tool so that you can't see the students' names. The other option that I want to mention, I talked about CrowdMark really briefly. CrowdMark also allows for grading blindly, where when you take a look at their quote unquote booklet and you wouldn't see their names. You can even grade them by question. So you go one question after another rather than student by student.
There's a question about video assignments and where it's located in MyCourses. And so yes, it's not, you have to add it basically through content. So if you go to the content tool, where you would normally add, upload a file, for instance, that is where you would have the option, correct me if I'm wrong, Teddy, I'm trying to remember what the options are right now, but it's through content where you would be able to add it, and it appears within the content tool. So within a module in your content is how students would access it and how you would add it. I see there's a question about images in a quiz. Can we ask students to download the image, draw on it, and mark the correct answer, and then re-upload the image? You could do this. It wouldn't be through the quizzes tool though. You could either do this, and again, it will depend how many questions you have and whether assignments is appropriate in this instance, but the assignment tool would allow them to do that and upload their answers, or the other option that Teddy just spoke about, CrowdMark, would be another option where students could upload an image as well for this type of question. Any other questions or feedback? We've got about 7 or 8 minutes left. Oh, Teddy.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Robin.
So what I want to mention is yeah, that's a great idea for the assignments tool with uploading the image. So you can either have the image downloadable in the quiz, or have it downloadable in the assignments tool in the instructions, so they can download it and and then upload it afterwards. In terms of the create the video assignment, I'm gonna stop sharing and I'll show my screen so I can show that part. Let me see, share. So when you're in content, you can go and click add existing activities and create a video assignment. It's right here. And then so from where you go there afterwards, you would go and create it. But that's I'm not going to get too much into the steps, but that's pretty much it. And you can create, these are the different types of video assignments that you can create. I hope that answers your question. I think it was Myrna.
Grace is asking about the assignment tool. Whoops, just lost my chat. Where do you set up the email acknowledgement of receipt of assignment?
The great thing about that is you don't have to. It's by default. So students automatically get a receipt. You can actually also have an email sent to you. But again, it's up to you if you want to have it also duplicated so that students have submitted. But really, it's automatic, so students get the receipt and they can take a look at the history at any point in time when they go to the assignment tool.
Good question. Our students assume to know how to do all of this on MyCourses. No, it's not assumed that they know how to do all of this. However, depending on what year they're in, it's a very good chance that they've already done a lot of this on previous courses. And of course, part of what Teddy was mentioning in the key takeaways is the importance of practicing, so giving students low stakes opportunities or practice opportunities to try out these different tools, so that to help ease their nerves if the quiz is being used for a final exam, for instance. So giving them the opportunity to submit as they would for a higher stakes assessment gives them a chance to go through the steps and get used to the tools as well. So we really highly recommend you give them those opportunities. Is there a place on the TLS website where students can also access information such as these webinars? Yes, there is. Adam, could you put in the link? Okay, thanks, Adam.
So Robin, you can identify either beforehand, probably beforehand if you know students will be having difficulties. But if you are taking a look during the session, you can also see as the quiz progresses what steps they are on, if that's something that you're interested in. But in general, you may want to plan ahead of time if you know students will need special accommodations. But overall, yes, you can also take a look at it while in the quiz tool while they're going through questions, if that's something that interests you.
All right. Seeing if we missed anything. Got a couple minutes left in case anyone has any other questions. Yes, that's correct, Robin. OSD will contact you for any special accommodations. All right, I guess we'll end here. What do you say, Teddy? Teddy, we can't hear you.
Thanks everyone for, I've been trying to mute myself because of the keyboard typing that I do and it's so loud. But thanks everyone for joining us, and always great to see all these good questions come up. Pushes us to think more about these too. And so again, these will be posted, including our slides, on the TLS website. Thanks so much.
Thanks everyone.